Good morning. As is customary, the night especially, the week prior, but especially the night prior to the talk, my mind starts working its gears just to find the most appropriate topic that is relevant and pulsating around me in my living experience, as well as within me, that I might find to be also hopefully and possibly relevant to the listeners here. And the one theme that has been permeating my mind and my sphere of experience, as it were, has been on love and relationships. And that, usually would take days to talk about, as you can imagine. However, I'm going to try to do my best to cover during this talk. Love and relationships go hand in hand, as you know. Oftentimes we think of love as it's related to another human being or other human beings, or other entities, one's own pets, for example. A friend of mine is he's a monk, actually. He's a Buddhist monk, Theravada monk, in the East Coast. And one of his friends, part of the congregation, part of the Sangha, lay Sangha, a woman, had just been told by the city that the old tree that's right out front, in her front yard, was going to get brought down, chopped down. A living, breathing tree. So she called on him to at least do something, to pray for the tree. So I just saw the clip that they had shot of him giving, this loving set of words to the tree itself. It's in English, it's not in, he's not talking or mentioning from the suttas directly, but he's talking from the heart. And it moves the person who's watching this. And he's talking to the tree as if it were another human being. Telling the tree how it will be missed, how not to get agitated. Because in Buddhism we still look at all living beings as different levels of consciousness, of set of awareness in a sense. So I just wanted to mention that briefly, that when we talk about love and relationships, the spectrum is quite huge of how love can manifest in one's experience within life. Now, love that has everything to do with truth, in fact, love equates itself with truth. Love has everything to do with honesty. You cannot have honesty without love. We cannot have love without honesty. At least that's how we look at it in Buddhism. Think about that. Just love and honesty with an equal sign between. Oftentimes we're living in different societies, or the culture that we're living in at the moment, there's always this one-upmanship, as it were. Everyone is trying to outdo the other, or trying to... There's a battle of power, in a sense, to keep the dynamic going within a relationship. And that is undeniably there, yes. However, if we recall that love is also not something that falls into one's lap. It's not something that you just stumble upon and that's it. From that point on, it's just there. You take it for granted. Love, in essence, is work. Love takes work. And one might even push, and the meaning of that, the definition of love as work, into seeing it possibly as a knack or a special skill that develops within one. It cannot be taught. Love is something that can be worked on and introduced into one's life to permeate one's being. Where after not having seen a person, you walk into the room and they see you and they sense something different, other than the gray hair on your head, other than the wrinkles, other than the attire that you might be wearing differently. It is inseparable from one's being when you have love pulsating within you. In fact, oftentimes I remember, that's a funny way of saying it, but I just imagine, visualize that scene when the 5 disciples of the Buddha had promised themselves, to each other in fact, that, once Siddhartha Gautama, the ascetic at the time, when he walked away from them after 6 years of tremendously austere and ascetic practices, where he was on the verge of death and he saw that in that weak body of his, there was no way that he would be able to attain enlightenment, his primary goal, his sole goal of choosing the ascetic life. And he saw at that moment that there has to be a middle ground. And as he stepped away from that path, his companions, his 5 disciples, told him that he was a quitter. He was like any other layperson, in fact, because he was now choosing a path that was different than what they had been following him for. So anyhow, they had this very staunch position of not respecting him, not greeting him, had he chosen to come back to them. And lo and behold, after he became the Buddha, at first he wanted to go and show his appreciation to his other 2 teachers when he was a bodhisattva, who had shown him how to attain to the 7th jhana and the 8th jhana. And he saw with his mind that they had already passed on. Realizing the magnitude of what he discovered and how he would go about, and whose mind might be ready to take that and absorb it and gain the same fruits as he did, he saw that his 5 disciples were at a very peak state of acceptance of his teaching. So he walked and walked to reach them. And as he was approaching them, the 5 disciples, they saw him approach from afar. And they looked at each other and they said, "Remember our oath. We shall not rise in his presence. We shall not respect him. We shall not do any of the things that we would have done to him and while he was our teacher." And as he approached, they could not help but rise from their seats, go over, bow down, pay their respect, go prepare a seat for him, prepare water for his feet to be washed, wash his feet, and take care of him as a student does to a teacher, a monastic. I've always wondered what might have caused these 5 human beings who had made a pact to completely forego what they had promised to each other. And then as we read the suttas, we come across these kings and these brilliant minds at the time of the Buddha who approached him, and they couldn't help. People who had actually really told themselves or their companions that they will not, give in, as it were, to the Buddha. And then you hear the story of how he was able to tame the drunken, intoxicated elephant that was charging down the road upon the Buddha, set loose and completely intoxicated by the help of the Buddha's own cousin who wanted to kill him, Devadatta. And how the Buddha just stood there, and his students wanted to block the path of the elephant, but he just stood there and asking them to move aside. And he was just permeating metta to them, to the elephant, radiating loving kindness. And when the monks came back and they saw what had happened, the elephant, this huge bull elephant, was resting as the Buddha sat next to it. It was resting, and the trunk of it was resting next to the Buddha, and the Buddha was just caressing gently its trunk. Some might look at these stories and they just say, it's just stories. But all of us at one point or another have experienced love. Love of those people with whom we grew up. Love of individuals that come into our lives. These wonderful relationships that we get the taste of while we are living. And the relationships that inevitably come about. Now that's the other thing which I've always been curious about, relationships. And I've always wondered about life itself. You're driving your car, the rules and regulations on the road that everyone has to follow, the laws, the protocol or proper ways or mores that we need to all follow, rituals that we need to be involved in order for us to be accepted and share in this living experience with other human beings. They're all relationships, aren't they? And when you look at how we look at these relationships, that pretty much says it all. You see how there are these conflictual relationships we have. Again, oftentimes with the same people that we've shared love with or have love towards, which can be quite frustrating at times, and other times blissful. Makes us feel like we're growing up beyond our own capacity. In that sense, love is a challenge. And the person we love, in order for them to be a person that really has the capacity to love, they need to also have the capacity to challenge us. Oftentimes we seek comfort. And we seek ways of looking at individuals that make us feel good. And that's it. In that sense, when we look at our intention to just feel good, I just ask the question, would that be fair for the other person, let alone for ourselves? Because what is love? It's none other than not the outside world per se, but it's about ourselves, isn't it? We often are always externally directed. We're just looking at love as an extrinsic rather than an intrinsic quality to enhance our living experience. Extrinsic meaning outwardly, intrinsic meaning within ourselves, here, unavoidably immersed in the present moment. Unavoidably. And that's where relationships occur, don't they? Relationships don't occur in the past or the future. There's something that live comfortably in the bosom of the present moment, immersed in it. And I guess that brings us to the third element of this talk, which is safety. It takes enormous courage, which is another quality of love. It takes enormous courage to actually withstand the intensity of the present. When you're sitting across another human being, for example, or a community, someone or an entity that has the ability to respond and to possibly even hopefully challenge the status quo that is who we are or were a millisecond ago. That's why love is not for the cowardly. That's why love is not for those of us who are afraid of being challenged. And then, by the way, that's another quality of a true friendship, isn't it? We constantly keep hearing from teachers or read in impactful books, for example, or quotes, or nowadays blurbs, how they say a friend who is, obviously I'm paraphrasing desperately here as far as what some of these stand for. Basically, it's a friend is someone who will challenge us. A friend is someone who is willing to risk it all for their love for us, to improve who we are. Not somebody who's just a yay-sayer, who just says yes, yes, yes to everything we do. And every once in a while we've had these individuals in our lives. What we have, therefore, done in response to that, to those actions, tells us who we are in relation to the friendship or the loving relationship. Have we walked away from these individuals who said, no, no, that's not acceptable because of you're much more than that? Otherwise, oftentimes, we find ourselves just in this vicious cycle of repeating patterns of negative states of mind, negative behaviors. For that reason, I personally don't think that human beings are just cut out to be islands on themselves. We are very social beings, including, respectively, the monks and nuns. Even at the time of the Buddha, yes, the Buddha always chose to be somewhat secluded, and that's one of the criteria of a monastic. However, they don't just live for the rest of their lives on this planet in a cave. They're always associating with other human beings in a communal sense. That's also a relationship. Communicating with other beings. Now, how many people can, however, manage to be risk takers, to challenge what they have in this relationship, whether it's a friendship, romantic relationship, you name it? How many people have the guts to do it, though? How many people are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to risk it all in, as they say? And that shows you how safe this individual is. That and their capacity to forgive. And this includes ourselves as well. Do we have the capacity to love? Okay, everyone says it's my right to love. I want to experience love. How come I'm not experiencing love? I want more. Okay? Well, it has a caveat. It has next to it a portion that says, do you have also the capacity to forgive? To accept? And that's a big one. Not necessarily towards the other person, because when we're accepting the other person or the act, We're not just accepting it blindly. There is intelligence, there is wisdom there. There's experience there. Remember, we are developing a tougher skin, or the skill set is rising to experience more empathy and to experience more compassion towards the other person or the other being, which we call love. And when you're doing this, inevitably your sense of who you are strengthens so much that automatically you start attracting beings around you. They feel safe. And when people ask them, why do you, I don't understand, how come people always come and talk to you? They come and ask you questions. They seem to feel comfortable around you. What is that? What's the trick? What's the magic? Is it a certain perfume or cologne or something you're wearing, or how you speak with people? Are you applying, Dale Carnegie's principles of how to gain friends and things like that? What's going on there? And oftentimes people don't realize that the reason why they will approach is because they sense a tremendous presence of safety within you. A safe person is a person who is always exuding a sense of love. You sometimes hear or read about it even in other biblical texts. For example, in case of Jesus, people say that children used to gather around him, or animals used to gather around him. Saints in other cultures and religious traditions. Things quiet down around these people. That's another definition of safety. At least that's how I understand it. And are you guys with me so far? One of the Sangha, lay Sangha members, earlier before the talk, said something very powerful, very poignant, with your permission. This gentleman said, yes, as we age, safety becomes very important in our relationships. And that stuck with me. So true. So powerful. Now, the only thing that I might try to adjust in that statement, or add something, would be it's not just as we age, however, the way I see it. It's from the very beginning of life. I work with children, teenagers, and I see all so many times where, and I work with families, and I see how there's just wounds, so many wounds there, hurt. On the outside it looks something like anger or defiance or extreme sadness, or just so many different types of anxiety manifesting. But when we dig deep enough, we see how that sense of safety had been torn, had been shattered, had been lost in this person's development as a human being. Oftentimes it's happening during a very early part of one's life, where the life cycles or the development of a person through different ages, we go through it. We're supposed to have gone through a certain development, human development. And with many of us, it's not smooth sailing. There were many, many bumps on the road. So, yes, unfortunately, a person does not come to realize the value of a safe, comfortable, growth-promoting relationship until much later in one's life, thanks to education, hopefully, that one receives. Still, though, that does not change the fact how necessary it becomes. In fact, all of a sudden, you want to start helping other people as you help yourself, so that they can look for relationships that are growth promoting. Many people talk about divorce rates being actually, I think it's over 50% now of marriages, possibly even close to 60. That's saying something about something having gone wrong. Is it the system? Or is it us? Is it the way we look at relationships? Is it the way we look at love? Many of us are trying to pull ourselves from the status quo, from this dullness that we are surrounded by. It's like if we were fish, it would be like the water surrounding us. It's all over the place. Every one of us is looking for some form of an addiction. Whether it's social media, whether it's actual drugs, alcohol, relationships, usually toxic relationships, habits of some sort that are absolutely useless as it relates to our growth as human beings, reaching our fullest potential, as it were. It undermines it. But at least it can get us out of this sense of monotony, this doldrum monotony that keeps going like microwaves, in a sense, just like when you're changing the radio station and you have that buzz sound. That's the microwaves from the Big Bang. It's just like that, underlying every sense of experience we're having. We're trying to muffle that. We're trying to silence that, as it were, with our different habits that come across as addictions. All in an attempt to just not feel, and then not feeling alone is one of them. We're trying to silence that sense of longing for something bigger. And if you take anything from this talk, then I would hope that, or wish for it to be, the sense of loving relationship that you develop with a safer you. A safer you, oneself. Because it's not about anything other than yourself, ourselves. It's not about anything outside of us. We're living in a culture where everything is about the other thing. The other, the thing outside of us. And we rarely look and turn the microscope or the lens at ourselves. Not in a judgmental way, because if we're not loving ourselves, really it's not going to be possible, truthfully speaking, to give even an iota of love or loving experience to another being. Not even that tree. Not even a pet. So it starts here and it goes outward, like the rippling effect. And how much of a tolerance do we have towards ourselves? How judgmental can we be towards ourselves? And can we change that focus? It's very simple. And I used to feel so much resentment every time a teacher would say that. It's so simple. They would give a formula and it's like, and then they would add a caveat at the end. They say, but it's not easy. It's simple. When you look at the Four Noble Truths, seriously, it's extremely simple. But it's not easy. To maintain that sense of awareness. And that's why when we talk about empathy, and that's like a word like mindfulness, you find it everywhere today. Everybody's talking about mindfulness. every Tom, Dick, and Harry, as they used to say, is talking about mindfulness. Same goes for empathy. Neither of these two actually are words. They're experience. Just like love. Love is an action verb, not a word. The way I understand it anyhow. And in my work with families and individuals and meditators, I always try to bring the attention back to those moments between the sits, between the sessions, for example. When I did work with, I still do it sometimes, with individuals who need help, physical help, etc., I always talk about their sense of awareness when it comes to those moments when they're not with me, when they're not listening to my instruction, my meditation instruction, or whatever it is. As I'm helping them try to understand how the body works or how the mind works, it's those moments when they're not there with a teacher that count. It's the moment that you get up and go to the restroom. It's the moment that you lean down to pick up a fork. It's the moment where you're trying to reach for your car door. It's the moment when somebody, for example, gestures something nasty while you're driving. Are you mindful at that time? Not of the other person, not of seeing what they did. Oh, I can't believe they just did that. No. Bringing the attention back to your body. Where's that heat? Where's the tension? It's part of it in your brain. There's tightness happening. And all of a sudden, if you're mindful enough, you're also going to see, I'm clenching my fists. Oh, I didn't notice that. My jaw tightens up. My throat. Ooh, what is that sense of tightness in my chest? This pain. That's where mindfulness takes us. And the same goes with love. Empathy. Otherwise, empathy is just another word. In psychology or therapy, people talk about it constantly. But how many really do experience empathy? To really not see that line, that borderline between oneself and another human being, and seeing their needs as one's own. Really feeling their pain, truly feeling it. And when one feels another's pain, one can also share the love that allowed them to feel their pain in the first place with them. It's not a word, it's an action. It's a skill that one develops. We don't get it by reading a few books by certain meditation teachers or doing a retreat or two or whatever. Not to undermine all those factors, because they are truly helpful. They're necessary, but the true fuel comes from within oneself. And the resiliency and the persistence that one puts in learning that skill, which allows one to have love, to build relationships based on love, which inevitably strengthens one's relationship with other beings through safe relationships. And safe relationships don't necessarily have to be many, numerous, like this culture promotes. If they are, they're wonderful. But it's not in number. Safety is not in number in this case. Safety is in the amount of love one has, irrespective of what the other person looks like, what ethnic or religious background they come from, etc. You add to the list. How they think. They might even hate our guts. Doesn't matter. Now, earlier I said something about forgiveness, and then I'll stop. Forgiveness does not mean necessarily you accept it and then you have to reconcile and hold the person, hug them, etc., live with them, etc., etc. No, that's not necessarily what forgiveness entails. Forgiveness means You're actually giving yourself some soothing by letting go of whatever was holding you back from moving forward, by thinking and reminding yourself of the pain that was caused by another. And you let go, you cut that chain that will pull you from life to life even. You cut it off. And then you open up your heart and you accept them. However, you don't necessarily have to be reconciling, in a sense, with them, having lunch with them or something like that. Some people have that question in mind often when we talk about forgiveness, etc. So please be mindful of that. Nothing that's love-induced can actually truly cause harm. And it always comes back to this sense of relaxed mind. Is there tranquility in the mind when you approach that person? If there isn't, then we need to inculcate that, bring that about. Tranquility in the mind brings about collectedness of mind, which brings about equanimity. So, thank you for listening. Do we have time for questions, Bhante?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. Please, if you have any questions.
I have a question about you talk about trust.
Trust?
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, I am not clear about, is it sounds as you feel safe? No. You talk about safe. Is it sort of kind of you trust the person and so you feel safe with the person, or with?
A good question. Let me rephrase what you just said, see if it's correct. If there is safety sensed from another person, there will follow trust. Trust is there. However, we have this interior, I guess, ability. As you get wiser, we have that ability to tell apart a person from their words. And that's where action and words have to be coherent. They have to go congruent to each other. They have to go working together. Because I might say I'm the most loving person to you, etc., etc. I might do one or two things that would say to you, wow, this person really loves me. Okay? But then in between sentences, you see me doing things that are completely opposite of that. What some of us do is we keep reminding ourselves of those few things that look like they were coming out of love. That does not allow you to feel safe anymore. What we do, however, is we hold on to the past or the hope of a future with this person. Based on what? Based on those few incidents where we saw something that we recognized or thought that was love-induced, coming out of love. However, your trusting is coming from a hope from a future, hope of a future, expectation of a future that you're envisioning that it's going to be in a certain way, based on something that you thought was love in the past. Meanwhile, you're completely ignoring what's happening in the present moment. That's why love is very much immersed, swimming in, drenched in the present moment. And that's why sometimes we have a difficulty accepting what's happening in the moment. We like to go back into the past and say, but do you remember what happened then? You remember how it was this? Oh, maybe we can have that in the future again, completely ignoring what's happening here in front of our faces. This is going to give us the ability to either trust or be wise enough to move away from that unsafe relationship. Does that kind of answer your question, or you're not satisfied? Please.
Well, I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
Digest.
Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I wanted to thank you for your talk, and especially because this one is about love, and sometimes it's a little hard to, because a lot of our talks and our sutras are about attachment and non-attachment, and sometimes I can't help leaving a little guilty, like, oh, I'm so attached, you know, I love people, and how do I reconcile, you know, trying to work on non-attachment. So can you talk a little bit of how, I know it's a whole different topic for a whole other day, but...
Well, it's related, yeah. Thank you for your question. As you were putting words to your thought and asking the question, I was reminded of a poem from a Sufi teacher, Hafiz. I think it was in the 15th century or so, maybe older. He says something, even after limitless, well, like since, you know, the earth formed, I guess, the sun never turned to the earth and said, "You owe me." The sun never did that to the earth. With countless sunsets and sunrises and limitless boons and benefits that it has given to the earth. I guess what connection I'm finding between that and what you asked is, you know, the attachment that we have. Oftentimes, we as humans have the difficulty of doing something wonderful, experiencing something wonderful, and just leaving it at that. Really being immersed in the experience of that without holding a person accountable or coming back and saying, yeah, how come you're not doing that for me again, type of a thing. And that sounded kind of banal in a sense, but the way it functions within the mind and the emotion is usually manifested in the form of an attachment in one way or another, where we have this thing called expectation, which obviously on some level it has to be there to maintain the relationship. There is this code, there is this agreement between two or, you know, more individuals, but everyone is on the same page, as it were. So there's some level of expectation. However, there isn't an element of hurt either. Of if you don't do this, I'm going to do that to you. There's no vengefulness, which is another definition of love, in fact. Love is not vengeful. It doesn't seek vengeance. I've seen relationships, I've even been in relationships where for one thing or another you might not be able to do the thing that your partner might hope for you to be doing. Something very simple or superficial even. And then the other person completely blows up and does something extraordinarily out of character, completely shattering the bond of the relationship. Why? Vengefulness. So that means that individual or those individuals have not really graduated to the next stage of development. Something's missing in their growth. No matter how many layers of mirages you can actually put on top to cover that up, it's still going to manifest in the form of actions in the person's behavior. So behavior is extremely important. One of friends of mine actually in the past used to say, trust the behavior, not the words. And that took me a long time to understand. Trust the behavior, not the words. That's why I mentioned how one's words, behavior, and thoughts have to come and merge together. They have to be one and the same thing in order for us to really experience safety within ourselves and on the outside world. Yes, we have
one more. Yes.
One more? Sorry. Yes?
Yeah, so thank you for your talk. I have a question about something that you said that kind of reminds me of talking about healthy and unhealthy relationships. There's a quote that I really like by Nina Simone, and she says, "When love is no longer being served, you have to leave the table." And you said the present will either give us the trust to stay or the ability to move away from a situation. And I was wondering if you could talk more about moving away from a situation. What does that look like? And what are some of the indicators, what are some of the things that indicate that we should move away from the table? Also keeping in mindfulness and vengefulness and just
Thank you for your question. A wonderful question at that. I would say that the ability to get up and leave, as long as it's not coming from a state of vengefulness or to get even, to punish, which has a defilement of anger in there, which also has a defilement of delusion in there. So there is no love. It's a very infantile way of looking at things, which many of us are still plagued by. However, when we do have the mindfulness to be aware of all these different sensations that are occurring in the body, when you see the other person not doing what you're expected of them to do as a partner or whatever position it is, the relationship, then you will look at the situation truthfully as it is, without adding your own colorations of the past or the future. That's where these things come in. So, you did this because you've done that in the past. Oh, I'm going to get up and leave the table because you're not doing what you did then. That, to me, sounds like it's lacking the essence of compassion. To not look at, wait a minute, I don't know what's going on here. Let me give them the benefit of a doubt that other possibilities and variables might have taken place that I might not be aware of. Now, having said that, if it's a habitual pattern, though, where you can consistently see that there is a major discrepancy, cutoff, between what this person is saying, doing, and behaving like versus what they were like, and you come back to yourself, which is the ultimate filter of experience, and see how these things are influencing yourself. So once you've seen that you're not coming from a defiled state of mind, and you're in a position of you have a front row seat of experience that is completely against your principles, then you will make a judgment call at that point. But the moment you walk away, if there is a lingering sense of guilt, there's something wrong. That's why such decisions, I think, would best be taken or made with a clear mind. That's one of the reasons why I mentioned how tranquility of mind is of extreme importance. And if you have love towards the person as you're getting up and walking away, then that's a good bet that you are coming from a good solid place of empathy. So, I hope that answers.
It does.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chandana. Time is running very fast.